All right, let's dive into a text that, it's almost 3,000 years old, but wow, does it hit like today's news. We're talking about the prophet Micah, and you got to think of him as this voice from way outside the system, an outsider calling out corruption right at the heart of power in ancient Judah. And let me tell you, he does not pull any punches.
So Micah doesn't really ease into things. The chapter kicks off with this one word, woe. I mean, that's a gut punch right there. It's not just a sad word, it's a full-blown alarm, a declaration that judgment is on its way and things are deadly serious. And he's pointing his finger right at the powerful elite, the ones sleeping soundly in their beds.
So what exactly is the crime that has Micah so fired up? Well, it's not just some vague general corruption. Nope. He targets a very specific, very systematic injustice. The powerful are methodically, and legally in their own minds, stealing land from everyday people.
And this isn't some crime of passion either. It's a calculated four-step process. First, they dream up these evil schemes at night. Then, as soon as the sun rises, they put their plans into action. They see a field they want, and they just take it. They covet, they seize, and they literally extort a man's inheritance. Now, you have to understand, in their culture, land wasn't just property. It was a sacred promise from God, meant to stand a family forever. So this isn't just theft. It's a deep, spiritual violation of their entire covenant.
And let's look closer at that first step, because the language Micah uses is so vivid. He doesn't just say they plan evil at night. He says they work evil on their beds. You hear that? It's not a passing thought. It's their job. It reveals this really chilling mindset where injustice has become their craft, their profession. They're so obsessed with it that even in the middle of the night, they're busy building these wicked schemes, just waiting for the sun to come up. So how does God respond to this? Well, Micah lays out this core principle of divine justice, and it's absolutely crucial. It's not random. It's a direct, measure-for-measure response. It's like a mirror image of the sin itself. Let's break down how this works.
Okay, this is just fascinating. In the original Hebrew, Micah uses the exact same verbs to connect the crime and the punishment. So the elite devise evil plans. Well, God responds by devising a disaster right back at them. They seize people's family land. God is going to seize the land back and reapportion it to others. For anyone listening back then, this wordplay would have been impossible to miss. The link between their actions and their consequences was undeniable.
And the humiliation doesn't even stop there. Micah brings in this powerful image of a heavy yoke being thrown on their necks. Now, these are the people who walked around with their chests puffed out, full of arrogance, and now they're going to be literally bent over, forced to bow down. It's this perfect symbol of their complete loss of status and the crushing shame that's coming for them in exile.
Now, you'd think a warning this clear, this specific, would make people listen, wouldn't you? Nope, not a chance. The powerful, and they've got their own prophets on the payroll, they just push back. They have a really simple message for Micah and anyone else telling the truth. Just shut up. Stop delivering all this uncomfortable bad news.
And this is literally what they tell him. Do not drip. Now, I know that sounds bizarre to us, but this was a very specific and very cutting insult. So what on earth does it actually mean to drip?
Well, the Hebrew word here is natav, and it literally means to drip, like a leaky faucet. Drip, drip, drip. The false prophets were using it as this snarky, derogatory term for real prophecy. They were basically saying, stop your annoying dripping. Your words are just this constant, unwanted noise. It's a really clever, really nasty way to ridicule and dismiss Micah's deadly serious warnings. So what was their deal? Well, the false prophets were more than happy to drip a very different kind of message, one the powerful actually wanted to hear. They'd say things like, hey, I'll drip for you about wine and beer. They were literally offering comforting lies for a paycheck. And get this, there's a fantastic pun in the original Hebrew. The word for falsehood is sheker, and the word for beer is shekar. They sound almost exactly the same, which perfectly ties their lies directly to their liquid reward.
So what happens when a society decides to reject the hard truth and just embrace comforting lies? Well, the result is absolutely devastating. Micah paints this picture of a complete social breakdown. War veterans are being abused. Women and their children are being driven from their homes. The land itself becomes so polluted by all this injustice that it's just destined for ruin and exile. The entire social fabric just gets ripped to shreds.
I mean, the picture Micah has painted is about as grim as it gets, right? Injustice, corruption, total social collapse, and judgment just around the corner. It feels completely hopeless. But then, right at the very end, in the last 2 verses of the chapter, the whole thing takes this shocking, abrupt turn. Right after all of this ruin and destruction has been laid out, a completely new voice breaks through the noise.
And just out of nowhere, the language completely shifts from judgment to restoration. God makes this new promise. He says, I will gather the remnant, the people who survived the disaster, and I'll set them together like a secure flock of sheep in a pasture. But it doesn't even end there. A king, a new kind of leader, will break through the gate in front of them, leading them out to freedom, with the Lord himself right at the head of the line.
And this really gives us the central contrast of the whole chapter. On one side, you have the corrupt elite, the leaders who seize land, abuse their power, and pay people to tell them comforting lies. And on the other side, you have this promise of a shepherd king, one who gathers and protects his people and who breaks through obstacles to lead them into a new future.
So in just 13 short verses, Micah takes us on this incredible journey. It starts with this raw, unflinching look at how injustice leads to total ruin, but it ends with this shocking, breathtaking promise of restoration, led by God himself.
And this 2,700-year-old message really leaves us with a huge, timeless question. Micah saw with perfect clarity that a society built on injustice is basically on a collision course with ruin. And yet, he also insisted that even in the absolute darkest of times, hope can break through. And it just makes you wonder, where do we see that exact same pattern playing out in our world today?